In this Dragonfly Creative class, you're going to create a bias cut tee. This tee is loose and flowing and is so versatile it can be turned into a dress or tunic. We'll be covering how to cut the pattern, how to mark and prepare for sewing, and then a step-by-step construction guide for the garment. This tee looks daunting, but after you're finished, you'll think it's a piece of cake. This class's kit includes the pattern and blouse weight rayon. So if you're ready to learn and get creative, I look forward to seeing you in class soon.
Hi, this is Nick Coman with Dragonfly Creative, and today we're going to be starting on a new project. Today's project is going to be the bias t-shirt. And technically it's not a t-shirt, it's more like a shell, but we're calling it a bias tee just because it's easy to wear and it's a wonderful addition to any wardrobe. And it's super easy. It's 2 pattern pieces and it looks weird to begin with, but with a little bit of coaching, you're going to be able to get right through it. So what we're going to start with here is I've got my fabric laid out. Now this is a 54-inch wide piece of fabric. I've got it folded in half so it all fits on the table right now. We're going to have several different fabric colors available in our kits. These are 2 right here, the royal blue and the coral. They're both really beautiful and they're real nice lightweight rayon, really drapey, beautiful, fun to wear, easy. And then right here I have the pattern. So what we're first going to do is I want to talk to you about the pattern itself. There are 2 pieces to this pattern and they look very, very similar. Okay? There's this one, which is actually the front, and this one, which is actually the back. The way you can tell they're different is this is the back neckline, and this one right here is the front neckline because it's got that lower, that deep sort of center. And then all of the marks here are the center fronts on all of the different sizes. Now you'll also notice we have a dotted line coming off of here. This is a shoulder line. So this entire thing is on the bias. This is actually going to be on the bias. Okay? Everything is sewn on the straight of grain, but then when you get it all sewn together, it hangs on the bias. Here we have one of our bias t-shirts. And this is made in a rayon crepe. And if you'll notice, all of those lines, when they were dyed, the lines were straight up and down. Now they're all diagonal, okay? And you see a seam coming all the way up this side, and then it comes up and around, and all the way to the back neck. So that's how we get this garment to hang on the bias. And then I'll show you finishing it later. So because this is on the bias, we can't fold the fabric to cut it. So even though I have that fabric folded so they'll fit on the table, I just wanted to show you that a 54-inch wide piece of fabric is going to be plenty to get both pieces out of your pattern. But what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to cut down the fold, or just rip it, is what I do. And rip the 2 pieces in half, and then you're going to cut your pattern out. I suggest always cutting your pattern out. If you have an aversion to cutting your patterns up, and you want to trace it first, then go ahead. Just make sure and get all the markings in the notches, okay? And you can do that, but I do suggest starting with the pattern piece already cut out. Then you're going to lay it onto your fabric, pin it in place, and I use several different weights, and whether you want to use pattern weights or tunic hands or washers, or I usually use my phone and a pair of scissors. Whatever you have, weight that fabric down, because any sort of fabric that does well on the bias can tend to be a little bit squirrely. So you want to tame that squirrel. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut these pattern pieces out, and then I'm going to lay them out onto the fabric and cut it, okay? And then we'll come back and go from there. Hi, welcome back. Now what we've done is we've cut out the pattern, and then I laid it on the fabric and I cut out the fabric from the pattern. But what I want to show you what I did is at all of the notches, however you choose to make notches, I go ahead and I take my scissors and I just make a little teeny clip right into the edge of the fabric, not even a full 1/4 of an inch deep, a little less than that. Now that we're back, I'm going to take the pattern pieces that I cut out and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to label all of the notches with tape, and I'm going to match up my notches with the notches on the pattern, and if the notch on the pattern says A, then I put a little A on the tape. If the notch says E, I put a little E on the tape. This is going to help us line everything up. So I put the tape on the wrong side of the fabric on both of these fabrics, okay? I also mark a little piece of tape on the hem. That just gives me sort of a place to gauge where everything is when I'm sewing this up. So once I do that, I'm going to put them right sides together, or correct sides together, and I'm going to line up my notches, and then I'm also going to make sure that my neck holes are lined up. So this is a B, and this is a B, and they both line up. And now what you're going to do, and what's going to feel like the strangest part, is you're going to go ahead and you're going to sew right along here and right along here. But I'm only going to sew until the end of this piece of fabric. I don't need to sew all the way down to the corner. I'm only going to sew on this piece of fabric just to the end here. I know it's hard to see on the film, but once you see it on the sewing machine, you'll get it. Let me just pin this together. And I don't usually pin a lot, but on this kind of thing, I absolutely do. And I always pin, I try to pin perpendicular to the seam. It just makes it easier to pull those pins out when you're sewing. Now we are ready to take it to the sewing machine and start sewing. Believe it or not, from this point, you've already done the hardest parts. Now we're going to sew these seams, which are basically sort of the shoulder, and then we just have to sew the underarm and the seam across the front and the back, and we're done. Well, not quite done. We've still got to finish off the neck and the hem, but we've got the body of the garment constructed, so this couldn't be easier. So once you've made this once, you really are going to be able to cut one out in the morning and wear it that afternoon. Okay, let's go to the sewing machine. So one of the things I forgot to mention when we were cutting out the pattern over there is that as soon as you get the pattern to the point where you have the entire outer body cut out, I always chalk draw or take an invisible marker, whatever you use to mark your fabric, and I trace the neckline onto the fabric. I move it over to the sewing machine and I stay stitch right inside, you can see I did right inside the actual cutting line. So this isn't going to be seen when we do the final finish, but this is going to keep the neck from stretching out because so much of this is on the bias. So if you want to have good results with your neckline, stay stitch. So now we're over at the sewing machine and I'm going to go ahead and sew my shoulder seams from B to A into the neckline, okay? And all of the seams in this pattern, unless they're otherwise marked, are at 1/2 inch. That just makes things easier, and a little smaller seam is easier when you're doing bias. So I'm going to raise that needle, I'm going to line my seam up, put that needle down, and I am starting right at the end where that fabric comes together to meet the other one. So you can see it if I lift it up, okay? And I'm not going to backstitch at the seam because it is going to be used in another seam, and I want to be able to either stitch it a little further or take it a little bit out if it's not just the way I want it. So now we're going to just go ahead and cut that, and then I'm going to continue sewing on the other side, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to flip towards the neck, or sew towards the neckline again. So we're going to start right here. Grab that pin out. Grab this one. Now we're almost at the end of our seam. And I realized that I have my stitch length still set for stay stitching. And that's one thing that I actually didn't mention was as soon as I cut out my two pieces, I went ahead and I stay stitched the neck, okay? I did that even before I cut the neck out. I took a piece of chalk or whatever marking stuff you have, and I marked the neckline. I sewed just inside that neckline so it won't stretch out, and then I cut the neckline out. You need to do that so that it won't stretch because so much of this is on the bias. You can end up with a big gaping neckline, and you don't want that. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to iron these shoulders flat, and then we're going to keep going.
Thank you for watching this Dragonfly Creative class. If you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.